Every choice has a consequence. On October 2nd, 1995, I took 23 steps. That's the distance from the back of the room to this point right here. As I took those steps, I thought about my wife. I thought about my 2 children, Rob and Alex, so they were yay high at the time. I thought about my career. I thought about the community that I grew up in. I thought about the church where I had formerly been a music director. I thought about everything that defined who I was. In a small town in western North Carolina, I was Chuck Gallagher. I was a somebody. On that date, on the 24th step, I reached out my hand, opened the door, and stepped into federal prison. On that date, I became 11-6-42-058, an inmate. On that date, I became what most of you in this room would describe as a nobody. Ladies and gentlemen, every choice has a consequence. Now, there's one thing that is different from today than back then. Does anybody want to give me a guess as to what that might be? Quiet grump. I'm not 11-6-42-058. Actually, if you went to bop.gov, I still am, and will be for the rest of my life. There is one thing that is dramatically different. It is probably the most important thing that I have here today. Outside of the PowerPoint or the little slide thing working or what have you, there is one critical key thing that has to be done. And that is, I have the keys to the handcuffs. It is very important to have the keys to the handcuffs. Did you get that right, young lady? Did you get it right? See, you ought to win a prize. Yay, go girl. Having the keys to the handcuffs really is quite a handy thing. So, and let me tell you, it's a bit unusual. I'll step up here as I kind of remove some of this stuff. But it is a bit unusual whenever you're sitting here and it's like, okay, you've got this and you carry it on an airplane. Have you wondered what it must be like to go through TSA with 2 sets of handcuffs? It is quite unusual. They don't worry too much about the orange jumpsuit, but the handcuffs really mess those folks up. It really is it's quite challenging. In fact, let me just leave the orange down here. It's kind of a lovely visual reminder. Along with the handcuffs, I was fascinated coming here from Charlotte, North Carolina, because as I normally travel around the country going through this process, one of the things that I found out in doing that is whenever you put always carry-on luggage, okay? I don't want to pay for the other stuff. So here it is in the carry-on bag. There's 2 sets of handcuffs. You slide it through the little detector and there's someone there looking. And they're looking at the screen. And you wonder, do they ever catch anything? And they're sitting there looking, and he goes, stop. And then they look at you. And then they call someone and they say, is it okay to have handcuffs? And then the supervisor comes over and they look. Now, ladies in the room, you all understand, you can't have more than 3 ounces of liquid on an airplane. I get 2 sets of handcuffs. I don't know, does that make sense to you? It really doesn't necessarily to me. But they look at me and they think, is he law enforcement or a pervert? And then they look carefully and they tend to think the latter. Well, okay, so be it. Now, I started off with the statement that every choice has a consequence. But with the statement that every choice has a consequence, it's kind of interesting because when you think of ethics, there's kind of 2 levels of ethics to be concerned with. One is at the individual level. And probably today we're going to spend a little more time at the individual level perhaps than at the organizational level. But at the individual level, it's a system of principles and values relating to our conduct that says the rightness and wrongness of certain actions. Now, so I'm going to ask a question. I want a little audience participation. You were sitting there looking very stoic. And that's just not acceptable. So we're going to have some fun. So I've got a question for you. And let me come down and we'll kind of have a little poll in the audience. Well, first thing, by a show of hands, we'll make it simple. How many of you believe it is ethical to kill someone? Raise your hand.
Depends.
I've got a depends. Okay, so I've got a depends. Nobody wants, there's one hand. That was brave. Okay, there we go. Most of you are sitting there like, okay, I'm going to keep my hand down. This is a setup question. Right? You know, they're videoing this. Maybe I'll be caught on video. Oh no, what will we do? So most people would say, well, no, it doesn't make any sense. No, of course we would not kill someone. But here's a question. You get back from this wonderful conference, you're back home in whatever place in Florida it happens to be, and it's your daughter or your granddaughter, and she's sweetly sleeping in this beautiful little bed in her bedroom, and it's got all this little stuff up there, and a crazed killer comes in with a knife and is going to kill your child or grandchild. How many of you believe if you happen to have a gun of some sort, other than paintball perhaps, that it might be appropriate to take some action? Okay. I knew I was in Florida. Yes, there we go. Okay. I'm from South Carolina. They'd say, yeah, boy, not a problem. We just shoot them down. So ethics isn't a defined, it's this or this. Oftentimes we get so caught up in, and people want to make it so right or left, or it's exactly black or white, and that's not necessarily true. It is always a function of what are the facts and circumstances in which you make the choices that you might make. Now, if we move forward and we say, okay, well, let's make it organizationally based, perhaps it's the county organization. Well, then we look at the group and the principles of the group and the culture of the group and say, well, where is our moral compass aligned? And I'll give you a quick example of this because it really makes sense. I was walking through the exhibitor area, and as I walked through that area, I noticed there happened to be a former client of mine. Skanska, they build big stuff, buildings and bridges and this, that, and the other. And it was an interesting thing because I noticed there they are exhibiting, but they exhibit a high degree of ethical principle in the organization. I had the opportunity to talk at one of their meetings, and I was fascinated by China is one of the largest areas where there is potential economic growth for the types of construction projects they do, but they choose not to be there. And you're sitting back like, are you kidding me? That's crazy. It's huge. What kind of business? But in China, it's payola. I pay for the privilege of getting the bid, etc., etc. And they said, our moral compass does not allow us to do that. It is illegal in the United States, even though it is acceptable in another country. We will forego the business. That is a stand on an ethical principle with a moral compass. By the way, they did not pay me to say that. I just happened to run across them, and it makes perfect sense. But let me look at, and I know maybe from some places where you're sitting it might not be easy to see, but there is this thing called the integral model. I'm a founder of a company called the Ethics Resource Group, and we do consulting work with different organizations. And in often cases, whenever we're doing an ethics training program, when we're trying to sit there and say, well, how do you improve the ethics of the individuals in the organization? If you look at the top, there are subjective things like intention. What is our intention? What is our thought process that translates into our behavior? Now, I walked in an orange jumpsuit, and we will talk about how that happened, but obviously there was some intention on my part that translated into behavior that resulted in an outcome that was less than pleasant. Now on the bottom part, then you have the group. And the group is, well, what is the culture of the organization and what systems can we put in play to help provide guidance to the individual so that we're all on the same ship going in the same direction in an ethical manner. So when we look at this, I'm going to start from our perspective talking about the individual. There are people that will argue often, well, there's no such thing as business ethics. Well, because it's all based on the individual. Well, that is true to some extent because it all starts with our intention and our individual behavior, but our intention and individual behavior can be guided through our culture and the systems that we create. Now, that's all very analytic, and you're sitting here thinking, oh my goodness, I hope this is not going to be boring. So we'll try to make it different. So I've got a question. What do these people have in common? Do you recognize that man? Look closely. I know the picture is small. I came from South Carolina. We learned that our governor is challenged, or was challenged, with direction. He went to the Appalachian Trail, ended up in Argentina. They wrote a song, "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina." I mean, you know, he practicing the dance. I mean, look at that. You know, it's okay, well, that's that. All right, whatever. What about that guy? Some of you are like, oh, no. I don't know. I'm feeling like James Taylor needs to come out. You know, in my mind, I'm going to Carolina. Because, I mean, we seem to be ripe with these folks. But lately, the fun one is this. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to say to you in candor and honesty, I think it was destined. If your name was Wiener, would you consider changing it? And would you really think about tweeting pictures of yourself? I mean, it's just like, come on, dude. You got to ask yourself, and the question that all three of these have in common is not what their ultimate behavior was. It might have been the intention that began the behavior and the fact that all of them lied. And if you will notice, and you look around, and it's easy to see examples of and point fingers at, but most every time there is unethical activity that takes place, there is one common thread that goes with it, and that is someone chooses to lie about the behavior. Martha Stewart went to prison not for insider trading. She went for lying. That was what took place. Now, we can sit there and look at those pictures and we can laugh and make jokes. But it's not really funny, is it? Because here is the report from the Ocala paper that says your legislature failed to add stronger ethics laws. You'll notice the byline, more than 800 public officials were convicted in Florida on various charges between 1997 and 2007. That's 80 a year that are spending some form of time in punishment, if not prison. And as I recall, there was an article that came out today that was talking about yet another official in a county who pled guilty to some sort of ethical violation or crime. I know, well, let's put it this way. Senator yesterday made a comment about this statistic, and he was very kind. He said to you, and I'm sure it's nobody in this room, but statistics are 1 in 9 in the United States will spend some time in prison. So statistically, some of y'all have been there with me, or are going. And as funny as that may be, man, I'd hate to look 10 years from now to find out. Now, I'm not the bearer of bad news. That is not my job. But I think we need to put it into practical perspective. Because I know as I travel around the country doing what I do, that there are a number of people who will say to me, you know, I really hadn't thought about that. And we're going to talk about what happens at the individual level that would make someone who otherwise makes good decisions perhaps make some that are less than acceptable. And that's important. If there is a message here, it is every choice has a consequence, and you can learn from my misgivings or illegal activities. I am not proud of those, but I am open to sharing them with you. Now, you'll notice at the bottom of the screen, there's a little thing that says text questions to 828-244-1400. Here's what I know. I know that everybody in the room is probably told, okay, you need to put your cell phones up, etc., and most of you are not going to do that. Some of you are tweeting, some of you are texting, some of you are sitting there reading emails at this point. You're wondering, what can I do? So therefore, if you have a cell phone and you want to ask a question, please feel free to dial 828-244-1400 and text it. See, that way, you can ask anonymous questions, and you can get as deep as you want to, and what I promise you is I will answer any question that you have, and it's absolutely okay whatever you ask. There are no dumb questions. It is an anonymous question. There is a microphone in case you want to, like the gentleman in the aqua shirt, stand up and just be bold and ask. I'm okay with that. We'll get to that point. But if you have a question, text it to me. That's okay. We'll check it as we go. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what took place that got me into that. It was 1990, and in 1990 I was tax partner in a CPA firm. I had testified before Congress. I was, text, there we go. That's going to be, ding, ding. I had testified before Congress. Dan Rostenkowski was chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee at the time. Some of you are old enough to remember Dan Rostenkowski. Dan Rostenkowski and I were in prison at the same time. I don't know if you remember, his was for stamp fraud, for using stamps from his campaign for things other than his campaign. And some people are elected and you have to think about simple things like that. But in 1990, I was out teaching continuing professional education courses. I had fun. I taught 8 hours of tax law. Can you imagine 8 hours of tax law? Isn't it exciting to think you could sit there for 8 hours and learn taxes? Oh my goodness. Most people thought that was the most boring thing in the world. I decided it should be fun. So I tried to make it fun and entertaining. We had sing-along. Do you all have sing-along at your conferences? You do not? Oh, Latrice. We did have sing-along. Sing-along was fun. In the tax world, especially as it got close to Christmas, we would do things like tax returns, money on the way. We fill out the messy forms, but the clients have to pay. I mean, things like that. You know, stuff that was fun. So I'm sitting here. We had gone through about 4 or so hours of this. It was lunchtime, and I was in Boise, Idaho. It was mountain time. My stomach was on East Coast time. It was mountain time. I walk out of the room. Now, you all remember 1990. In 1990, we did not walk around with cell phones. In 1990, you walked out of here. I'll put that on vibrate. In 1990, you walked out of here and there was a bank of phones, and you went to the bank of phones and you used your calling card, and everybody got on the phone, and it was a rush to see who was going to get there first. So I walk out of the door. There's this little pink slip out there that says, while you were out, it says, call one of your partners, Dan. So I'm thinking, I'm kind of up for lunch, or call Dan. Well, I'll go ahead and give him a call. I mean, you know, because we have a difference in time. I pick up the telephone, I call Dan. Dan answers the phone. Hey, Chuck, he said, I know you're going to be back sometime later this week. This was on a Wednesday. He said, I'm not sure if it's tomorrow or Friday, but one of the clients that you invested some money for, well, they've had a change of circumstance and they need to liquidate the investment immediately. And since I'm not sure when you're going to be back and he's real anxious about this, if you'll just tell me where the file is, I'll go ahead and begin the process of making the telephone calls. As most of you can imagine, when I got that call, it was a life-changing call. God knew, and I knew the truth. The truth was I had not invested that client's money. The truth was I had stolen it. And as I heard those words ring through the phone, I knew that life as I knew it was getting ready to change. And I'm going to suspect that there are some of you in the room who have had some life-changing moments like that. You may not be willing to openly talk about them, and I'm okay with that. This is not true confessions. But you know what those life-changing moments can be like. More than likely, it was the same as the day Anthony Weiner tweeted his tweet thinking it was going to one person and it went to all of his followers. It was a life-changing moment. Now, I don't know about you, but I did the only thing that I knew to do when I had Dan on the telephone. I danced. I said, well, Dan, I said, I'm going to be back tomorrow anyway. And I said, it's not like this is invested with Charles Schwab. I can't just pick up the telephone call, say, liquidate the investment, we're going to have the money in 3 days. I mean, this is a non-liquid investment. So give them a call, tell them I've got it under control. I'll make a few telephone calls this afternoon while I'm here on the lunch break, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Oh, and man, I got to go, so I'll talk to you later. Okay, bye. And hung up. I'll admit to you, I lost my appetite. In fact, I honestly have no memory of that afternoon. Here's what I do know. I know I went back into the class, and we'll say that the class was about the size of this part of the room right here. And I know that I had another 3.5 or 3 hours and 45 minutes, whatever it turns out to be. So I was sitting there and I had taught whatever course it was that I was teaching enough that I could teach the course, and I was on autopilot and I did what they needed, and they were sitting there, like, okay, we've got to wait until 4:50, and at that point in time we can get out and get our piece of paper that said, yes, we've been there, etc. And when the room cleared and I finished and everybody was gone, much like this room, I sat down, and I will admit I cried like a baby. Because I knew the choices that I had made and the illusion that I had created was toppling down before my eyes. And I didn't know what to do. Now, I will tell you, I know it's early in the morning and it's kind of heavy right now, but I will tell you that I considered that evening suicide. That seemed to be the most logical way out. I was experiencing or having what would be called a dark night of the soul. And I suspect, and it doesn't have to be this experience, that there are those of you in this room who have experienced dark nights of the soul. Now, I will also say to you, as I look around the room, I have a mixture of ladies and men, probably a few more men than women, but let me say this, women, you all in the room will completely understand what I'm getting ready to say. Some of you men in the room, you will be in denial. But men don't do pain as well as women. Now, some of you men that are willing to step up to the plate and agree with it, that's true, we don't. And I have a phobia of needles. So I will tell you, pain and things like that just don't work for me. And I'm sitting there thinking, and I'm not trying to be funny with this, it's just reality, this is a true statement. How would I take myself out? I did not have a gun, okay? I was flying in an airplane, that didn't make any sense. I didn't have a car to do the garage carbon monoxide thing. I had a blue Bic razor. Y'all have ever had one of those blue Bic portable razors? They don't do well. They don't do well here, much less trying to whack yourself or anything like that. And I've often thought, if you jumped off the building from the jump until you hit, what do you think? I don't think, that was a bad move. I don't know. But I couldn't get there. So I did the only thing that I knew to do. I picked up the Yellow Pages. Today it would be Google. But then it was Yellow Pages. And I'm flipping through psychiatrist, psychologist, proctologist, whatever. If it was physician and somebody could talk to Chuck, I wanted to be talked to. And as I was sitting there going through that process, I got angry. Because every time I called somebody, this is what I got. I'm sorry, you've reached the office of Dr. Such and Such. Our office hours are open from 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. You've reached us after office hours, but at the sound of the tone, if you'll leave your name and number and a brief message, we'll be happy to give you a call back tomorrow, and have a nice day. Have a nice day, if you're thinking of offing yourself, is not what you want to hear. You're in depression and they're having a nice day. That's like calling a funeral home and saying, it's a great day at Gallagher Funeral Home. I mean, you don't do that. So I'm sitting there and I got through call number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, every one of them an answering machine. On number 7, somebody says, hello. I'm waiting for the rest of the message. Okay? And there was no rest of the message. And I said, I need to talk to somebody. And the guy on the other end says, oh, I'm sorry, we're closed. I thought this was my wife calling. I'm supposed to meet her for dinner and I'm running just a little bit late. I'm the last person here. But if you'll leave your name, and I knew what was coming. And I said, I'm considering suicide. Then he said, let's talk. I don't know about you, but I mentioned a funeral home a minute ago, so let me go with the cemetery. Y'all know what a tombstone is. Seen the big granite tombstones. They etch those things in their granite and they last forever. Well, it's forever as much as we're going to know. So what this guy said to me is etched in my brain much like something that's on a tombstone. He said to me this. He says, son, you've made a terrible mistake. But you are not a mistake. Let me repeat that. I can hear his words. I can hear his voice in my head. He said, son, you have made a terrible mistake. But you are not a mistake. He said, the choices that you make today will define your life in the future and the legacy you leave for your two sons. Make those choices wisely. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me say to you, I don't know who it was I talked to. It could have been a psychiatrist, it could have been a psychologist, and it could have been a janitor. I really don't have a clue. I do know this. I do know that that morning when that man got up in Boise, Idaho to go to wherever it was that he was working, he did not get up that morning and say to himself, you know, I think I'm going to save someone's life today. He didn't get up thinking that. But he did. And let me say this to you before we move forward to get to some more details. You have the same possibility of impacting people's lives. On a day-to-day basis, you don't know the time or circumstance when someone may come into your sphere of influence and the words you say to them could have a dramatic and magnificent impact on the direction that they take. Every choice has a consequence. Now, let me go here for just a second. The question that typically comes up, because you know at this stage of the game what took place, the question is, what would cause an ethical person, a person who knows the difference between right and wrong, what would cause that person to do unethical things? Now, I'm going to say, and I believe I'm pretty accurate in this statement, that if I were to ask each person sitting in the room, do you know the difference between right and wrong, between ethics and unethics, or between ethical actions or unethical actions, maybe that's the more appropriate way to put it, you all could say yes. You know that. Yet, 800 people just in this state that are involved in government, much like you, have been at the end of unethical choices and the consequences that follow. So how in the world can something like that take place? What I'm going to show you is how it happens, and I'm going to explain it through my experience. The first thing is there are three components of ethical lapses. And you can take to the bank, whether it is Governor Mark Sanford, whether it is John Edwards, whether it's Anthony Weiner, whether it's Bernie Madoff, or whether it is the person yesterday that was reported on in the state of Florida who pled guilty, these three things in some form or fashion came together. And we're going to look at it like a three-legged stool. If there were a three-legged stool on this stage, I could step on that stool and it would support me. Might have to maneuver a little bit, but a three-legged stool would support me. So let me talk about what in the world caused me to end up in that. And we'll start off with, let me see, I want to say it was 1986. And in 1986, here I had just probably, I'm about a year and a half into the partnership as tax partner in this firm. Everything was going great. I mean, the career was moving forward spectacularly. I'd had articles published and all of this kind of fun stuff. The career was going wonderfully. But I remember in college something that I was taught. It was in the accounting and finance. In fact, I believe it was a finance course. And it said something to the effect that one of the things you should do is you should use leverage. Leverage. And here's how it was explained to us. When you get out of college and you get your first job and you're making X amount of money, what you should do fairly soon after that is buy the most expensive house that you can barely afford. Now, it might be painful, but if you went out, now in those days, I mean, you know, the compensation was different than what it was today. When you start off as a grunt accountant, you might make $2,000 a month or $24,000 a year, and that was really great. But whatever. But buy the most expensive house that you can barely afford. I mean, when that monthly payment hits, you need to squeal feeling, that's painful. But why would you do that? Well, here's the theory. The theory is, if you're doing your job appropriately, what's going to happen is your income will slowly rise. Okay, so you make a little more money the next year and a little more the next year and a little, so we're supposed to have an increase in income. Okay, your house payment would stay the same. That was before the days of major adjustable rate mortgages like we've seen now. So your house payment would stay the same. So over time, what would happen? Well, eventually you would start paying on the principal, so you would have more equity. And your house should normally go up in value about 3% a year. Now, I'm in the mid-80s. This is after Carter, when we had 20% interest and crazy stuff like that. Okay, so that was the concept. So I did that. I found myself at this point in time in 1986, how do I want to put this? Overextended and underfunded. I believe in 2007, 8, 9, and 10, going into 11, that there are a preponderance of people that we know that are overextended and underfunded. In fact, we might say our federal government is overextended and underfunded, as are your civic governments, which require some really tough choices. So I got a call from the banker. The banker said, Chuck, according to our records, you're 2 months behind in your house payment. Is there a problem? Now, let me ask y'all a question. Y'all in the South, so I can go with the y'all thing. Folk up in Minnesota don't get that. But let me ask y'all a question. Here's the reality. If I am a tax partner in a CPA firm in a community and the banker calls me and say, can you not make your house payment, do you think that will instill confidence for him to want to send me business? Maybe. It depends on if the banker's overextended and underfunded. Okay. The answer probably is no. At least not those days. So I'm sitting there thinking to myself, this is not good. And the fact was, I was 2 months behind. And at our firm, at the end of tax season, we got these big old monster bonuses. It was a wonderful thing. I love tax season. But up to that point, it was just regular income. So I'm sitting there thinking, I don't have the extra cash to be able to make this thing happen. What am I going to do? So again, I said to the banker, keep in mind, this is 1986. In 1986, we did not have the computing power we have today. In 1986, the computer was less powerful than my phone today. I said, are you sure you haven't misapplied that payment? Oh, that's a good accounting word, you know. I mean, from time to time, what should you do? You talk to people where they can get you. So did you misapply it? And they looked at me like, I don't think so, but let me go back and look. So we went back to look. That bought me time. Now I've got a question for you. It's a real simple question. How many of you are Geminis? Raise your hand, please. Okay, I've got a few in the room. Those of you that are Geminis, let me ask you a serious question. Do you talk to yourself? Yeah. Clyde says, I do. I appreciate you admitting that, Clyde. I do too. Gemini, do you talk to yourself? I bet you have some of the best conversations with your, don't you? Dude, I understand. I'm so with you. Jim and I are two people. We talk to each other. I have some of the best conversations. I never have a problem with an HR department. If I need to take somebody to woodshed, I do that in my car. I can take somebody to woodshed in my car and nobody ever has to worry about it. I don't mean really. I just carry on the conversation so I can get it out of my system. But I'm sitting there as a Gemini, and I'm thinking to myself, man, I've got a problem. I need $2,000. It was a $1,000 a month house payment. I said, I need $2,000. What am I going to do? Now, I already had plenty of credit card debt and other kind of debt. I was, as I said, overextended and underfunded. So what was I going to do? So I happened to be trustee of a trust. I had my trustee hat on. And I looked over at myself and I said, you need a loan. My other side looked at the trustee and said, well, you're right. I know this is highly unusual, but is there a possibility that we can work it out? And the trustee side said, well, you know, if I were to make a loan, it's going to have to be at almost usurious rates. I mean, it's highly unusual and we really don't have good collateral. Will you promise to pay it back? Carrying on this conversation, I said, you know, I really do. I promise to pay it back. I'll pay back whatever you need. I just need to be able to make this go away. And I carried on this conversation back and forth. The trustee said, well, now, you know, in order to make this legitimate, we're going to have to do a note. So I sat down at the computer. Some of you in the room are too young to get this. Others of you will completely understand. But I sat down at the computer. I was using WordStar. Some of you remember WordStar, Lotus 123, programs before Microsoft sucked them all in and took it over. So today it would be Word. So I'm sitting down at the computer and I type, you know, I, Charles Gallagher, being of sound mind and body. Sound mind was clearly a question at the time. Body was probably okay. I promised to take and borrow and pay and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the banker called me. He said, Chuck, we've looked at it. And I said, before you go any further, I said, I am so embarrassed. I said, I am so embarrassed. Now let me share with you, I'm going to go ahead and say this, ladies. There is an evaluation for you all to fill out. And so, ladies, I know that some of you are not going to like what I'm getting ready to say. So let me tell you, you can go ahead and put it on the evaluation now. But I said to the banker, I said, I am so embarrassed. I said, we just had our first child just 2 months ago, and my wife pays the bills. That was not true, but he didn't know that. She had no clue I hadn't paid the bill. But he said to me, I said, I am so sorry. I said, she thought I was taking care of it because she'd had the baby, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought she was taking care of it and nobody took care of it. And you know how embarrassed I am. This is terrible. And he says, well, he says, let me share with you. He said, I passed a bad check once. And it was like we had this bonding moment, you know? It was like true confessions. How does that play out to this stool? Number one, there was a need. The first component of an ethical lapse is there is going to be a need somewhere in your life. Now, in this case, let me be blunt with you. It was simple. The need was I needed money. That was it. It was simple. But it gets more complicated. The need may be you've got to figure out how to balance a budget. The need may be you have a social works project that needs to be done, but you really don't have the money to be able to do it. And perhaps somebody comes to you and says, a vendor, well look, if you'll go ahead and cut us the deal, we've got this kickback and we can provide some funding to help you with your project. There can be all kinds of needs. The people may ask the question, what was Bernie Madoff's need? His was emotional. He didn't need the money. Bernie's a smart man. What he did legitimately made sense. He was quite intelligent. He could never be wrong. That was a need. The need was he could never admit, oh, we had a bad year this year. It went down 12%. It never went down with Bernie. And the folks at Goldman Sachs would tell you, if they would be honest today, we knew that there was something fishy, but as long as he was producing the numbers, you know what was more important? Getting the numbers than finding the truth. There was a need. But let's take the story a bit further. The second is there is an opportunity. Now, in this particular case, what happened? Well, number one, the banker says, you've got, you're behind in the house payment. I had a need for cash. Okay, great. We got that. But I also happen to be trustee of a trust. Therefore, I had the opportunity to defraud. Now, this is very, very important. When I'm sitting there, and I'm going to use this as an example, when I'm sitting there and we develop a program that says, okay, here's an ethics program for your employees to help define the culture and the actions that take place in your organization so that you have an ethical atmosphere, you have to recognize opportunity is one of the critical things that you can eliminate. You cannot change in the room necessarily the need. The need may be individual, but you can remove the leg of opportunity. Now let me say this to you, it is very important that you understand. I am not, it's very clear, I'm not blaming my partners for anything that I did. What I did was my choice. It was my intention that created behavior that got the action, and my partners were not at fault. However, we could have had one part of our organization that said, if you're a trustee of a trust, there has to be 2 signatures on a check. I mean, that's simple. This is not rocket science right here. If there had been 2 signatures on the check, I would not have had the opportunity. Because then I would have gone to my partner and said to my partner, hey, let me tell you, I happen to be behind in my house payment and I need some money. So let's go and steal from a trust so I can get the money. Now, what do you think would happen? My partner would slap me silly. Did you not slap me silly? Probably. Okay, there we go. I know you're not a violent man, but you'd probably slap me silly. Or the partner would say, you dummy, well here, let me loan you the $2,000 at the end of tax season, pay me back, and maybe you ought to get your house in order. That would have been okay. But there was a need, and I had the opportunity. So in your organizations, the question may be, if you're sitting there saying, well, how do we create an ethical environment? Part of the ethical environment is recognizing if there are needs, we need to figure out then how to remove the opportunities. Now, I'm going to conduct a survey, and we're going to do it with this side of the room. You all on this side of the room are the guinea pigs. Okay? So I want all of you here to look at these people over here. Go ahead, you can look at them, it's okay. You can wave if you want back. Okay, here's the deal. The municipal government is facing serious financial woes. And we have 2 choices. We can look at this group of employees over here, and we can decrease their pay by 20%. Everybody get a 20% decrease. Y'all get a 20% decrease. They get a 20% decrease. Everybody in the room get to share in a 20% decrease. Don't you feel love at this seminar? Everybody gets a 20% decrease. Option A. Or option B, you all get to keep 100% of your income and fire these folk. That's the choice. Okay, got it? So we're going to take a real live survey. Everybody needs to vote. If you keep your arm down, somebody's going to capture it on camera and we will come back to you. So all in favor on this side of the room of having an across-the-board pay decrease, raise your hands. Okay, that's most everybody. All in favor of firing them, raise your hand. I want to tell you, I'm appreciative you folks are just honest. You got to have one. And in this case, we got 2. There we go. This is good. Okay. So most of the folks said we would have the across-the-board decrease. Now, let me say this to you. I'm not telling you what you need to do. I'm not that smart. I'm not telling you what you need to do. But let me point out something to you when you look here. If we came along and said that everybody in the room was going to take a 20% pay reduction in order to keep the job, we have created need in 100% of the workforce. Because most everybody in the room Take the shoe off and get ready to eat a little leather here, or whatever part of it's leather. But most everybody in the room probably lives up to your income. We're not typically saving 20% of our income for a rainy day. That ain't the American way. So if we come along and everybody takes a 20% pay decrease, everybody's need just increased. And when need increases, people respond fluky. They look for opportunity. On the other hand, if we terminated, and I made it extreme, but if we terminated 20% of the workforce represented by this group and everybody else got to keep their money, we have created need for them. Have we not? We have. But we've eliminated the opportunity in our organization because they don't work for us anymore. Sorry, y'all. See ya, pink slip, goodbye. But I know they have a need. My heart may go out to them, but I know I have eliminated the opportunity. Does that make sense? So sometimes when you think of the question of ethics and how we respond, it's not always easy. What are we creating for people? Now, I said I needed the money. I said there was the opportunity via the trust. What's the third component? The third component is rationalization. So if we come along and we say rationalization, rationalization is the component that takes an educated, intelligent person who knows the difference between right and wrong and puts them in a position where they can justify an unethical choice. Let me play it back to you quickly. I need money. Need. I am the trustee of a trust. Opportunity. And I rationalize that I was borrowing money. I could easily say, I would say to you today, stealing money from someone just is not right. I got that. But if I come along and I say, would you loan me the money? And you say, yes, I'll loan you the money. Well, it's not theft. If I take the money from you and you don't know it, even though I pay you back, it is theft. But in your mind, maybe it's okay. Need, opportunity, rationalization. I paid it back. Therefore, I really rationalized that it was a loan. And I borrowed again. Let me rephrase that. I stole again. And I paid it back. But then I started to figure something. Well, gosh, this must be okay. I just have my own private lending source. And I took more. And here's what I found out. It's a fascinating thing what money will do. Money buys friends. Money creates power. So as I took money from sources that had no clue, and I increased my lifestyle, different car every 6 months, new bigger house, stuff I could barely afford, I found out something. My accounting practice grew. I had more people that wanted to associate with me. They said, gosh, this guy must really be good. And I took more. And there is a point at which, I wish this were not the case, but there is a point at which as human beings, sometimes we will get on that proverbial merry-go-round and there ain't a way to get off until you're slung off. Y'all remember as kids, the little merry-go-round where you'd get on and people would run around. They'd run as fast as they could until they couldn't run any faster. And you were hoping like crazy that you'd sling somebody off or they'd get sick and throw up. Y'all remember that. Well, that's what happens. Need, opportunity, rationalization. When you remove one component, the ethical lapse will fail. One component. So when I'm sitting here and I'm putting together today, because a lot of time has passed, an ethics program, the question becomes, and something now is saying to what in the world? Yes, very good. Thank you. I must have hit Pandora. What used to be free music service and now they charge for it. So much for a great smartphone and big fat thumbs. But today when I sit there and we put together an ethics program at an organization, something for the long term, we have to look at need, opportunity, and rationalization. I would venture to say that in some of your organizations you've probably experienced this. Someone takes the proverbial telephone call, they start talking soft because it's a debt collector. And you've heard that take place. And they're embarrassed by the fact that at work they got a call from a debt collector. Well, you've just got an indication there's a need. I'm not saying you can solve the need, but you clearly have an indication that there is the possibility, if not probability, that an ethical lapse may take place. Now, let me talk about a little bit of a reality check. October 2nd, 1995, I took 23 steps. I stepped into federal prison. First few minutes, they were reasonably nice. And then they escorted me back to this room. It was a cinder block room. It was about 8 feet by 10 feet. I walked it several times just to measure it. It had a stainless steel toilet in it and a wooden bench. They gave me paper. They said, "Here, read the rules." The federal government prints money, and most of the time it's straight. But they're not real good with photocopiers because they had these rules from the Federal Bureau of Prisons that had been photocopied and jerry-rigged on that thing so many times, part of the words were cut off. It was hard to really get a clear grasp of what was taking place. But I read the rules. It took 9 minutes. 2 hours and 51 minutes later, I hear a jingle of keys at the door. Now, let me say this to you. I want to give you the clearest representation of what it was like in prison. I am not making fun of anybody, so you know that. So we're clear. I'm just going to tell you like it was. So the door opens. There's a guy outside. He's a Hispanic fella. He's got a white lab coat on and has Pedro embroidered on his pocket. He is a physician's assistant. He looks at me. He says, "Step out of the cell, please. It's time for your TB test." And I'm like, "Say what?" "It's time for your TB test." And I'm like, "TB test? Isn't that the thing got 4 needles on the end of it?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's not good." And then the next door opens. And a large African-American guy comes out, and he's like Refrigerator Perry. I mean, we're talking big. I look at that guy, I'm like, dog, that guy is big. Dallas Cowboys would like to have somebody over there. Carolina Panthers, they need it. But it was big. And then the third cell opens, a Hispanic fella comes out, he kind of skinny, but all around his neck is tattooed. I mean, every inch. And I'm like, oh, that had to hurt. I mean, I can just feel it now. I was like, good golly, dude. And Pedro looks at me and says, "Okay, man, roll up your sleeve." And I'm thinking to myself, I pass out at needles. And I'm thinking, this is not going to be good. I have got to be okay with this. This has got to be okay. I'm thinking, this is, all right, just breathe in, you can do this. And he takes out this needle, it's got this thing, syringe, got 4 needles on the end of it. He looks at me and he goes, boom. I'm like, oh. And I'm thinking, okay, God, help me. I had just watched The Shawshank Redemption 2 months earlier. And I had a clear indication of what was supposed to happen in prison. And I'm thinking, I've got to be cool here, And all of a sudden, that needle goes in, and I'm thinking, okay, be cool, be cool, be cool. And the room starts doing like this, and I'm like, oh, this is not good. I says, hey, man, I need to sit down. He says, "What's wrong, man? You're allergic to needles?" And I'm like, would you shut up? I don't want to hear that stuff. And then he screams at the top of his lungs, "We've got a fainter!" And I'm like, well, thank you very much for allowing, telling the inmate population I'm passing out over a needle. I'll be somebody's wife before the night's over. This is not good. Refrigerator Perry next to me, he grabs me. He says, "It's okay, man." I said, "I don't like needles either." He said, "Have a seat." He said, "Nobody wants to be here, but I got you back." I found there was some humanity even where I expected there to be none. I went and I got my pillow, my blanket, my prison-issued uniform, my prison-issued underwear, There's prison issued everything. I'm walking through the compound. Everybody gets a chance to look at me. I go to my cell. I get in my cell. My name's Chuck. My cellmate's name is Buck. It's Buck and Chuck. Now, I don't know if they did that for comic relief or what, but you know, everybody thought that was just kind of funny. He was a little African-American fellow about yay tall. He'd been in prison for 6 years by the time I got there. He just looks at me. Didn't say a word. I'm thinking to myself by this point in time, you know what? I should probably just go to www.zipit.com. Best thing I can do is say nothing. He speaks, I'll speak. I don't know what else to do. I did not go to Barnes & Noble and buy Prison for Dummies. So I really wasn't sure what the protocol was supposed to be. It was 24 hours. 24 hours later, Buck comes in. He looks at me again. He says, yo, man, what you in here for? It's exactly the way he said it. I look at him and I think this is my moment. He has spoken. You know, and I've got to put on my Clint Eastwood, John Wayne, I am bad. I said, I'm a thief. He said, word? I look back at him and I says, word? Yo, man, I says, word. And I look back and says, word. And then he looks at me and he says, you don't know what I'm talking about, do you? And he flies out of the cell. And I'm like, I don't know what just happened. I have no clue. We did not communicate. This is not making any sense to me. Now, you all are sitting here looking very adult. Like, okay, I don't really know what he said, but I'll go along with it. You know, I've got to be here for another 15 minutes. Word means, in the prison vernacular or in the vernacular of the streets, are you giving me your word? Are you telling me the truth? Do you really mean that? Oh, you got to be kidding. I can't believe you're saying something like that. Really? I didn't know what he was talking about. And by the time I'm trying to assimilate this in my mind, Buck comes flying back in the room. He says, yo, man, I'll make you a deal. And I'm thinking, I've been here 24 hours and an inmate wanting to make a deal with me. I mean, what's up with that? And then it hit me. Well, I'm a convict, so maybe it's okay. I don't know. I'm not sure what the rules are. He says, I tell you what. He says, you don't know how to talk in here. He says, you don't know the language. He says, you don't know, you won't survive. He looked at me and says, you're too white. He says, you got to understand. He said, I can teach you the lingo, I can teach you what you need to know, and I'll have you back. If you'll teach me how to speak correctly, so when I get out, I have a chance at a real job. Let me tell you, Buck had more integrity than most people I did business with when I was out. Buck kept his word. He taught me how to survive. So that today, if I was in the depths of the hood in whatever city it happened to be, people might look at me and say I'm an easy target, but I know what to say. He took care of me. And when I got out in advance of Buck, and he got out, I helped him get his first job. We've been out, I've since 1996, he since 1998. Neither one of us are back, although recidivism is typically 70 to 80%. It doesn't have to be that way. In fact, a lot of that is reflected in the book that's here called Second Chances. And I'm not going to give you an advertisement. All I will say to you is if you want to buy it, feel free. There's a special rate with the envelope. And if you want to buy two, let me suggest take one and give it to your church or give it to your high school. Give it to somebody so that they can see that the choices that they have made in the past do not need to define their life in the future. There is something called a second chance. Now, with that said, let me ask you this question. And one thing that I'm going to provide to you is I have a handout in the back of the room, 9 traits of ethical leadership. And when you are kind enough, which I appreciate ever so much, to fill out the evaluation that's here, there's one in each book, but if you'll fill out the evaluation, I'm going to give you the 9 traits of ethical leadership as you leave today. But I want to ask you this question. We have talked about, and we're going to get to questions here in just a second, but we have talked about intention and behavior. That has been the individual route. I have been willing to transparently tell you what took place with that, and we'll answer questions that have come up. But the question then becomes, what is your culture? What is the culture in your county? What is the culture in your administration? And what systems have you put into place that can provide a good framework for ethical actions. I chose by my intention to create behavior that ended in an orange jumpsuit. If our organization had systems, not the culture, but certainly the systems in place that could have denied one of the three legs of that stool, I would have been forced to look elsewhere. And likely, at that moment of weakness on my part, I would have looked to a legitimate source and never had the opportunity to be here today. Now, let me quickly look and see what kind of text messages we might have. We'll flip over to text messages, and there are a couple. What was your sentence? I was sentenced, well, first let me say this to you. The crime occurred in 1986, 87, 88. It was discovered in 1990. I lost everything at that point in time. I rendered my license as a CPA back to the State Society. There was no point in doing an investigation. I did wrong. I may as well admit it. So I gave it back. That cost me ultimately everything. As you can imagine, I was no longer tax partner in a CPA firm. We sold house, cars, all possessions for all practical purposes. The only thing that I had really was something that could have closed, that it could have gone to Goodwill. Moved in with my mother-in-law. But here's a question, and I'm going to ask this very quickly. We'll go to the sentence. But I'm going to pick on the 5 people on this 2 rows right here. Let's assume that I stole $100,000 from each of you, just to make it easy and substantial. If that were the case, and I could pay you back with interest, or you put me in jail, which would you prefer? Your money back or me in prison? Everybody wants the money back. When I speak to universities, which I do often, all the students, or at least 70% of them, want me in jail. They don't know what it's like to have $100,000. Anybody else in the room is like, no, give me the money back. It's like Jerry Maguire, show me the money. So I made restitution to the people that I stole from with the help of family and friends. That did not make my crime right. But the local DA did not wish to prosecute me. I used to do his tax return, did a really good job for him, and he felt I lost everything anyway, so all circumstances considered, not a problem. Let me say to you, however, that in the summer of 1991, there was a knock on the door. Thank you for filling out the evaluation. Knock on the door. One was from the Department of Labor, the other from the IRS. The Department of Labor criminal investigator wanted me for a violation of ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, which, by the way, I used to teach courses on. Yeah. The IRS wanted me for failure to pay taxes on stolen money. I was tax partner in a firm. That never crossed my mind. 1040, line 37, other income, stolen money. Can you imagine? Oh my goodness. So, federal prison for Chuck. In 1995, when I was sentenced, I was hoping the judge would give me probation. I had paid everybody back at this point in time. I had lived a clean life for 5 years. Life was moving forward. It wasn't what it used to be, but it was okay. Surely it could be probation. Gavel hits 18 months active. 3 years probation. We'll tell you when to report. October 2nd, 1995, I began the sentence. Some people would say, well, you were in Club Fed. Let me share with you. You don't get to play polo and hockey and golf and stuff like that. You have to work. My job was cleaning urinals and toilets, urinals with the toothbrush. I made 12 cents an hour. The only positive to that was, at $249 a year, I did not have to file a federal tax return. And if you think time moves fast now, try it in prison. That's the slowest move you'll ever see. Let's see what else we've got here. You're answering it now? Okay, good. Why did you go to jail? That answered that question. So let's go back to messages and see what the next one is. You forgot about Arnold Schwarzenegger. Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot the Arnold. You know, in the pictures up there. Okay, thank you for that. Let me see. Other questions while we have some time. If you want to speak it from wherever you are, that's absolutely fine. I'll answer any question that you have. There's nothing that's taboo. Now you're very quiet. Okay, hold on a second. Your hand?
Do you think technology has increased or decreased the opportunity to go to rationalization?
Do you think technology has increased or decreased the opportunity for rationalization? Technology probably has increased the time frame in which you get caught, or how you can screw up. Has it changed rationalization? I don't know that I would say that technology has changed rationalization. It may change the mentality of how you would rationalize, but rationalization is saying, I'm doing something wrong, but it's okay. For example, if you're sitting there saying that in reality your opportunities, because somebody wants to give you some kickback or payback, but that's the way it's always been done in this county and that's the way it's supposed to be, that's rationalization. I would say to you that one of the things that takes place when we're in an organization looking at it is we start to try to figure out what kind of things people can rationalize. A couple of my friends, in 2006 I was Senior VP of Sales and Marketing in a public company. That doesn't make sense. Senior VP in a public company, convicted felon, those two do not connect. But you're not defined by necessarily your past, you're defined by the choices that you make today. And I'm living proof that those choices can create a second chance. But I say that to say, some of the people that I work with, I found out yesterday, have been let go from $250,000 a year jobs. And I asked why. And the answer that I got was this: they're no longer with the company and we wish them well. Okay, that was the HR answer. Now what's the truth? The truth is, don't take your wife out to a real nice place to eat and then write on the receipt a bunch of people that were business associates and submit it on your expense report. One fallacy, $250,000 a year job gone. And the likelihood of being able to replace that is slim to none. Every choice has a consequence. There was another question over here. Yes, sir? Total amount. $254,000 was the total amount that was stolen. That was split amongst 7 different organizations. Yes, sir? Do I live in Florida? No, I live in North Carolina. Live in North Carolina, work in South Carolina, and do a lot of work here in Florida.
Do you think that through your travels and speaking engagements all throughout the nation, that doing business in Florida with the sunshine is actually why the number is so high and have so many issues?
Do I think it's because you're in sunshine? I've got sunshine on a cloudy day. No, I'm sorry. I just went off into here in Seattle. Yes.
In economic development and other places in municipalities, and they cannot grasp the sunshine process. And they want to have me and other commissioners, and so we can't do that. And it's, I just wonder how that affects the talk about the Florida sunshine laws.
Right. And you know, the answer to that question is that the reason it's so corrupt? Well, you know, let's put it this way. Think about need, opportunity, and rationalization. Okay? You all have a strict set of laws to work with in the state of Florida. Yeah, I got that. I come in from out of state and I'm in a state perhaps that doesn't have that same set of restrictions and laws. I got that. So then the question comes down to, well, can I use my ignorance of your law as a way to find your temptation? Because I can be ignorant all day long and you can tell me I can't meet, and that's okay. Just say no if that's what the law requires. But what if I'm able to find of the 3-legged stool your need? Because that's how it starts. It starts with temptation that finds an opportunity that ultimately can be rationalized. There was a statement or question over here. Yes, sir.
One of the things I do in my field is prepare codes of business ethics and conduct for companies.
Right.
Businesses, not only for ethical conduct and so forth, but also to comply with federal laws.
Right.
Do you find in your consulting that the same kind of principles that apply to a code of business ethics and conduct for a private entity apply to a public entity? The same principles? Based upon the same 3-legged stool?
Well, okay, the question is, are the principles that apply in private industry the same that apply in public? And the answer to that question is yes, no. Okay, now was that good enough? I just wanted to make sure that was like real Texan, huh? You know, kind of like you're walking down that fence. The answer is there are some things that are universal type principles. We understand the universal principles. Got that? Then the question comes, okay, now once you pass the universal principles, what are the rules that apply in your state? So there may be rules, and let's use the state of Florida since that's where we are, that are in the state of Florida that may not apply in North Carolina. Does that mean that you need to take Florida's rules and apply it to North Carolina? Not necessarily, but there are things that are clear to a business, and I say business generically, to an operation, to an entity that are universal, and then there are things that start to become specific. For me, you draft rules and codes of business conduct, right? Here's what, and I'm not saying this critically, don't take this the wrong way, because I don't know what you draft. I've looked at thousands in a multitude of years of codes of business conduct, and most of the time what you find is they're very generic, they are compliant, they are generic, they are often boring, and sometimes they don't really address. It's almost like going to the lowest common denominator to try to find something that everybody can live by. Well, and I'm picking on the firm that's over here, Skanska, or Skanska. I can't pronounce that thing right. I should be able to. But you know, their code of conduct is we do not do business in places that it's natural and normal to have payola. That's different. It's compliant with U.S. law. They could probably, it's a multinational company, they could probably skate by it somehow with something, but they choose not to. That's now getting a bit more specific. What is our culture? What are we willing to do? What is acceptable to do? And what are we willing to put in place in our systems to make that work? Questions? I'm way running past time. Okay, so let me say this to you. Before I took the 23 steps, I thought I made good choices. After I became 11-6-42-058, I found out something. Every choice has a consequence. I do not care what the choice is. Every choice has a consequence. And that consequence doesn't mean bad. It can mean wonderful. I am a convicted felon. I wish that weren't the case, but unless somebody pardons me, I will be. But I am not defined by that. I can have a glorious and wonderful career and make an impact on people in a positive way, even though that may be a component part of my past. Before I took the 23 steps, I lived life as an illusion. I mean, it was all about the stuff, the surroundings, the name, the title, the power, the clothes, the shoes, the watch, the blah, 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 all of that stuff. After I became 11-6-42-058, I found out every illusion eventually dissipates. David Copperfield is great at illusions. But every morning he gets up, goes to the bathroom, brushes his teeth just like everybody else. He is not the illusion that he creates. And before I took those 23 steps, I thought I was successful. Defined by the stuff. After I became 11-6-42-058, I found out something. Success is not measured by the stuff. Success is measured by the impact that you have on other people's lives. Buck had an impact on my life. Regardless of what he may be doing today, he was a successful man. People will ask me the question often, well, if you had it to do over again, would you do it? No. Okay. No, it wasn't fun. But I can't change the past choices. All I know is today I have the opportunity to share with you in a variety of venues today what has taken place in life and how you in fact can find your second chance. So let me suggest to you as I close, make wise choices. Look past the illusion and claim your success by having an impact on other people's lives. Ladies and gentlemen, every choice has a consequence. Thank you.
Thank you.